Hello, welcome to everyone participating in today's webinar, Update on DCAA Current Initiatives. My name is Evgeny Sahenko. I'm a senior manager in our outsourced accounting department at GRF. And today we are joined by Paul Calabrese, who is a GovCon expert and a principal in our outsourced accounting department at GRF, and also Darren, who a manager in the IT and risk advisory departments. And the last part of today's webinar, we will hear from Darren, who will discuss some of the solutions for government contractor cybersecurity requirements. So some quick housekeeping items. Anybody seeking CPE credit today must complete and submit a short evaluation survey that will appear automatically following today's webinar. Please write down the CPE words as I provide them when they are given and hold on to them until you receive your certificate. And please also note that today's webinar is not intended as financial or legal advice. This is simply for educational purposes. With that, once again, we're GRF CPAs and advisors based out of Bethesda, Maryland, serving clients primarily in the DMV area, but also nationally and internationally. Our client and our firm serves a wide range of clients covering nonprofit, for-profit, publicly traded companies, schools, government contractors, others as well. However, our particular niche is within the non-for-profit and INGO space. We've been in operation for over 40 years now, starting as your traditional accounting firm providing audit and tax services, as well as outsourced accounting and bookkeeping services. I'd like to also point out that in addition to the wide array of services you see on this slide here, we also provide government contract consulting services. With that, and speaking of government contract consulting services, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Paul.
Thank you, Yev. Good morning, everyone. Well, today we're going to talk about the DCAA current initiatives. When DCAA goes and presents around the Beltway, around Washington, D.C., about once a year, they talk about what are their current updates. This is based on a prior presentation that was given by this gentleman, Bradley Wolf, and that's why he gets the credit for it. And we took snippets from that presentation, and then we'll go into some other things that they probably didn't go into. And also there'll be things that they may have talked about, just general things about how DCAA operates, which I'm assuming our audience knows, and so we won't go into that. We're just going to go into the critical issues because I'm sure the people on here want to know what is DCAA currently up to. So let's go to the next slide. And before I do that, some of you might ask, why is DCAA, Defense Contract Audit Agency in general, so important? And they are an agency that influences other government audit agencies. They audit primarily the Department of Defense, contractors, and sometimes even grantees and so forth. But other agencies often use and refer to their materials. You'll probably see at some point in my presentation, I may refer to their website, www.dca.mil, and on it, there are a lot of very good resources so that you can understand if DCAA is doing it or another agency, for example, that might do your incurred costs. Of course, if you're with USAID, they often refer a lot back to USAID. So it is important that we understand that, DCAA is an influencer. They have a lot of great stuff on their website. And that's just something to know. Also, there's a group that oversees DOT, Department of Transportation audits, and it's called AASHTO. And you may hear about FAR Part 31 audits. Often those guidebook refers back to DCAA and their DCAA contract audit manual. So they have pretty prolific influence in the government contractor world. So DCAA's priorities, as you can see on this slide, is the number one is incurred cost audits as they settle indirect costs and cumulative costs on a contract over years. And they have these demand audits primarily, as they call them, forward pricing. That's your proposal audits, a review of your provisional billing rates if you're small, And if you're large, your projected indirect rates, maybe even labor rates. They do business systems audits. Those are DFAR, defense FAR type audits or reviews that are required, which we'll talk about briefly. And they also talk about truth in negotiations. Another word is defective pricing. And of course, they're always doing a real-time audits. The most common is a floor check. They do other things related to the cost accounting standards and other items, but we're not going to focus on that today. So let's go to the next slide. So when they do a lot of these proposal audits or indirect rate audits, you can see that the last time they kept track of it, it took them still 81 days. I would say to you that if I'm a government contractor and in my prior life, I did work for so many years for 3 different government contractors, when DCAA shows up at the door and they're knocking to do a proposal, that's a very good time. It's a very good indicator. Maybe perhaps your proposal has been already accepted technically, and now they're going through the administrative and they're asking DCAA to do a proposal review. And that is one that you should be aware of and should be ready for. And I would say to you very clearly, even though they don't mention it in this update of their current initiatives, but in prior ones before COVID, they used to say the one thing they saw from government contractors was that they were often not prepared with the documentation for a proposal review. And so, you should have some kind of backup of all the documents that support your costs, specifically your direct labor, your bill of material, if you have a bill of material, or direct costs in terms of materials, other direct costs. And hopefully, your indirect rates have been reviewed by DCAA, but if not, and you're smaller, then you should have some basis for how you came up with your projections, because that is going to be very, very important. Okay, yeah. Next slide.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so with that, we're going to get to our first polling question. And the question is, where does it require government contractors to track their time on a timesheet? First answer choice is FAR 31.2 cost principles. Second is the FAR definitions. Third is the ICE model. Fourth answer choice is 2 CFR 200.430I, compensation for personal services. And finally, the last choice is there is no regulation. So please take a moment now to answer. While everybody's submitting the answer, I will provide the first CPE word. The first CPE word for today is audit. Remember, if you want CPE credit, you will need to jot these words down as I provide them, as you will need them for the survey following our webinar. Again, the first CPE word is audit, AUDIT.
All right. Well, there's only one person that got the answer right, and that is there is no regulation. So with that, we'll move on to the next slide, and we'll talk about that. It is interestingly that it's more of an industry practice. It's obviously mandatory that you do track your time, but unfortunately, not like the uniform guidance for grants. They're not specific, but it is still a requirement, but there's no reg. Okay. All righty. See if we can get rid of that poll still up there. There we go. Okay. So looking at incurred cost audits as being a requirement, the DCAA, when you submit an incurred cost audit, they have a template called the ICE submission, incurred cost electronic. You can get it from the website. If you're required to do it because you have a cost plus fixed fee or award fee or incentive fee or something like that, then you have 60 days. DCAA has 60 days to review it to make sure that it's adequate. So DCAA kind of refined this process. They want to kind of review what you submit. Hopefully you're using their document. It is true that if you have a more sophisticated system, you may have a legacy submission, and DCAA may even be on site if you're real large. And so they understand that's a little bit different. But for most smaller government contractors, it is the use of that. And You may even have grants on there, cost reimbursable grants too. Even though you're a government contractor, DCAA will review all of that. But what you see there is that they have to respond 60 days and say, hey, what you've given us is either adequate or not, and we'll give you a list of the items that aren't. And then you just work through that and get that done. Once they have an adequate submission, then they have a year to actually perform the audit, decide to do the audit or not. Many of these audits now are done by independent private auditors, which we'll talk about later, called IPAs. You can see the web link below, and on their website, almost at that same location, you can download the DCAA ICE Excel file, as well as, like, here's a checklist. This on the right, you can see just a snippet of the checklist and some of the things the auditors will look for in making sure that it's adequate, and then they have other audit programs should they do an audit. Okay. Next slide. Okay, good. So they now use independent public accountants or accounting firms to do some of DCAA's backlog. If you're a real large government contractor, I would be surprised. I would assume they would have their own auditors, DCAA's auditors there. However, they now are hiring, that's basically it, an independent public accounting, a certified public accounting firm to help them reduce their backlog of incurred cost audits. So you should be aware of that. The first agency that started using that was USAID back around 2014, 15 or something. And many of those IPAs that did them, they weren't quite as experienced. And I say that with a big smile. But now they are very experienced with USAID and, of course, DCAA. We have government contractors, so we've seen them come into our clients, and they're pretty much with it. They almost perform in many ways and look and sound like DCAA, except that they're a private firm. So they're much, much better at it now, which is good. But you have to understand, an independent public accounting firm is on a contract. And that's very, very important for you to understand. Why is that important for you to understand? Because at some point when they do their entrance conference, they'll probably tell you, let's say they come in like now, October, they'll probably say mid-February, we should be done completely. We got to submit our final report or draft report or whatever. So you have to have a sense that you must cooperate with them and provide the documentation that they need. If you don't, what I've seen happen in the past, which gets kind of into an ugly situation, is that they submit what they call unresolved or unsupported costs. And I saw one entity where there were issues on both sides, but they had disallowed, most of their costs, like 1.1 million. And we had to go into audit resolution later and resolve those issues. So they have a contract. They have to finish, whereas DCAA, could take their time and, well, not take their time, but certainly take longer. One of the things they really like about this is that it forces the government contractor to respond timely to these IPAs. DCAA really gets most of its question costs, and it's probably its annual report to Congress from proposal audits, forward pricing rates, defective pricings, rather than from incurred cost audits, because incurred cost audits, for them to get question costs, it has to be sustained. So, the government contractor has a right to respond to any disallowed costs as to whether they agree or disagree. And it could, if there's disagreements, it could go to the ACO, the Administrative Contracting Officer, for final resolution. So it can be a pretty heated process between the two in working out what's allowable, what's not allowable, what's questioned or not questioned. And so, proposal audits, if you don't know, you don't get to see the audit or forward pricing sometimes. They do it, they send it to the command or the agency that's requested the proposal audit. And you should ask for it, but you can't get it directly from DCAA. You'll have to ask under Freedom of Information Act directly from the procuring office once the proposal and everything has been resolved and the contract has been awarded. You should request it, because it'll give you insight into how they're looking at your system. But they can question costs right and left, and you'll never know it or see it unless you get the audit report. And so the last bullet, basically it's talking about in years past, DCAA had an internal kind of struggle. Should we try to preserve more headcount, more people in our firm, our entity, our agency, or should we basically give that up and have these outside auditors? And at first, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a little struggle there. But now I think they've basically accepted the fact that independent public accounting firms can do a fairly good job, and it helps them manage the incurred cost backlog. Okay, next slide. So I just wanted to share with you 2 slides, this one and the next. And for many entities that are either under 5 million or between 5 million and 100 million, which I'll show in a minute. But on this slide, basically the question is, you've submitted your incurred cost submission, that big mammoth, just large workbook of could be up to 32 or more tabs, that goes back to tab A, which is your summary of your indirect rates that you're claiming. And you submit it, and they've determined it's adequate. Now the question is, because DCAA still cannot do all audits. Now, maybe they're doing more audits with the IPAs with their funds, but they have what they call a sampling pool. And the idea is you want to be in that sampling pool, meaning that if you're less than 5 million, they throw you into that sampling pool, provided we'll see below some exceptions to that. So they'll throw you in a sampling pool, and then they do a random sample to see who they'll test each year. So that's a good thing. That may mean if you're not audited, they just will simply, once your incurred cost submission is determined to be adequate, they submit you an indirect rate letter, that basically says these are your final rates, and they're good for that year, and there's no audit. So that's a wonderful thing if you get put in it. However, if you've had significant question cost in the last completed incurred cost period, that they may then just audit you anyway, or if there's some departmental concerns. However, it's interesting that the last item under number 1, but basically what they're saying is there's got to be a good reason for them to do somebody under 5 million. Next slide. This is between 5 million and 100 million, less than 100 million. If you're over 100 million, there are special things. They may audit you cyclically. There aren't, I know there's one entity on here that's super large, but for most of you, you're probably under 100 million. And ADV, audited dollar volume, means what you're auditing means all cost type contracts, cost plus fixed fee, cost plus award fee, incentive fee. There isn't, probably couldn't even be this weird thing called a fixed price redetermination, which is very rare, but it gets into some cost issues. Could be cost type line items on a hybrid contract that's both fixed and cost, as well as on the T&M, it could be the ODCs and materials plus the G&A, because that part's flexibly priced, less any cost type subcontractors where it's large enough that they are going to do what they call assist audit and have someone else include that in their incurred cost audit and give the results to DCAA. But that's what it means. So you could start with 10 million, but then, the cost type contract you have maybe is 8 million. And then you may have assist audits of large subs and you get down to 4 million, then you're under 5 million. So you can see kind of how it works. And to be eligible for the sampling pool, again, the same first 2 bullets, no significant question cost, no departmental issues from anybody. And basically the last bullet saying you have an adequate accounting system. Okay, next slide. Yeah.
Excellent. Yep, you got it. Thanks, Paul. So we're now on our second polling question. And our question is, what DFAR business system does DCAA not perform? Is it A, estimating system, B, contractor purchasing system review, C, material management and accounting system, D, accounting administration, or E, earned value management system? So again, please take a moment to answer. As you are doing that, I will provide the second CPE word, which is cost. Remember, if you want CPE credit for this webinar, please jot these words down so that you can use them for the survey that follows our webinar. Once again, the second CPE word is cost. COST.
All right, I think we're done. The one audit they don't do is a contractor purchasing system review. So 2 of 18 got it right. All right, so let's get rid of the poll and move on to the next slide. Okay. So why did I bring up contractor business system audits? Because partially that is what DCAA does. They primarily do an accounting system audit under the DFARS, which is very similar to, if you ever heard of an SF 1408 review, a pre-award accounting system. That one's a little bit of a system review light, meaning they're looking at policies, procedures, pulling reports, making sure you can do what everyone, the basics of a cost accounting, whereas maybe in the DFAR accounting system administration, on which they can also do, they're going to do some testing and dig in a little bit more into your system. However, estimating and material management accounting systems are very, very large for very, very large government contractors. So it's just something you probably, unless you're very, very large, won't see. The reason why I bring up the CPSR is because, as we'll talk about in the next slide, but not go to it yet, is that there are solicitations out where people can get credit. But I just want to focus on you that how difficult it is to be ready for a CPSR. And if you're a small firm, think about it, that even under the FAR, the FAR has a requirement for this, and so does the DFAR. The DFAR is more involved and specific and has 24 criteria, whereas the FAR, I don't think it has as much, but it says the basic requirement is you got to have 25 million in sales, excluding commercial items. So you can see it's still meant for a large entity. If you have 25 million, in sales relating to contracts that could be audited for a contractor purchasing system review, you're going to be a lot larger. You'll be 50 million, 100 million, and so forth. And the reason why the procuring officers, PCOs like this, they don't have to approve subcontractors, but basically it's a 24, the DFAR version is a 24 criteria, and they're looking for a 100-page policy. It's gigantic and involved. Okay, next slide. And you can open up all the bullets. I appreciate that. So basically, an entity that's smaller, I've seen entities, believe it or not, just 1 or 2 million come to our firm and say, hey, there was some kind of like Seaport. I know that's always out there every year. And the latest version says that if you have, passed or had a contractor purchasing system review, a CPSR, that'll give you added points, I believe, under section M as in Mary of a solicitation, if contracts are still set up that way under DOD. And but there's a lot of things you need to consider. And the first thing is, do you have the requisite, the third bullet, do you have contract management internal expertise? Because this is going to involve not only purchase orders, but it's also heavily focused on subcontracting. And do you have it? Well, we have a contract administrator that sometimes does subcontract administration. They're looking for people that would run a kind of system like this where it's very large. They would have like an NCMA, National Contract Management Association accreditation, or they're an individual that was a contracting officer prior with the federal government. Then, yeah, those kinds of people would know the kind of system you want. But if you were just to do it, you would probably fail. In fact, we got into a situation where that's exactly what happened. And an audit firm, a professional service firm or a public accounting firm doesn't really want to do something if they know there's a high probability on a specialized review that you would fail, because you'd be paying a lot of money to do it. If it's really something you feel is necessary and you're starting to get pretty large, 20 million to 50 million, you probably should hire a consultant first to make sure that the policies and procedures are set up properly. And once the policies and procedures, let's just say, are in place, and let's say they're in place October 1st, 2023, then, 6 months later, 9 months, or a year, you have new transactions coming under the new procedures, because that's what they're going to test. They don't want to test things that are under the old procedures. And then there are issues where some of the smaller entities, they haven't worked with a professional service firm and they don't understand the expectations. And so a lot of big firms, when they see someone requesting, hey, how large are you? Well, a couple of million, and who does your accounting? I do it myself. Well, there's just so many issues there that you're not ready perhaps to deal with it. So that's why if you're a small firm, I would encourage you just to stay away. I know you'd love to have the points, but it's a very demanding certification. Okay, let's go to the next one. I probably beat that to death. Okay, so the truth in negotiations, audit, and if you can put down the other two bullets, DCA is committed to do more post-award audits. And the reason it's defective pricing issues is basically it's a fixed price contract. They do have this clause on cost type, but it's really you have a fixed price and you've provided lots of detail, and they require you to sign something called a certificate of cost or pricing data. Okay, let's go to the next slide. And that should be a major warning for you. So the concern to DCA on a fixed price contract or the government is you had knowledge of decreasing cost that was not disclosed to the government. And it's considered an improper windfall to the contractor. And it applies to a $2 million pricing action, which means either a mod or original contract. So let's go through an example. Even though my example, as I realized when I put the slides together, is under 2 million, but I think it still kind of explains to you what is this defective pricing, because I did sign a certificate of cost or pricing data. What does that really mean? Well, let's use a simple example. A contractor proposes $1 million fixed price effort, okay? And the subcontractor will work with them. Well, XYZ subcontractor goes out of business before they sign the contract, or what they call the date on the agreement of price. But the contractor doesn't revise their proposal or notify affirmatively, and it gets into a lot of legal issues, notify the government when they're signing the contract that really they can't do it. So let's just pretend in this situation, the contractor performs the sub work, and the subs work is in a task order work breakdown structure where you can actually see that the contractor did the subs work. Let's say the sub work was a plumber and you were helping on a base contract or military base, and all they did is plumbing. And so they didn't do it, you did it. You set up a task order, and here it is, $2 million, not $3 million. And then you performed the rest. So you did the entire thing for $900,000 instead of $1 million, and you did not inform the government. They would say that $100,000, instead of it being $300 to do the plumbing work, it took you $200. You didn't notify them. They would ask for $100,000 back. So that would be a significant and serious issue. So I'm simplifying it. There's a lot more that goes into it, but that's basically the concept behind it. If you have a certificate of cost or pricing, it's something like, it's a very highly worded thing, I mean, for FAR Part 15 and or 4 or something, and you see this and you're signing it, talk to people before you sign it. Make sure everything is disclosed. If something significant, even it could be like your indirect rates came down and you didn't notify. So just be aware of that. It's like a red flag. Okay, let's go on.
Okay, before we go on, let's get to polling question number 3. And the question is, since there is no regulation that requires timekeeping, what is the basis of time tracking becoming a mandatory requirement? Is it A, for allocability, B, industry practice, C, all of the above, or D, none of the above? So once again, take a moment to submit your answers. As you are doing that, I will provide the third CPE word, which is system. Remember, if you want CPE credit today, please jot the word down as you'll need them for the survey. Once again, the third CPE word is system, S-Y-S-T-E-M.
All right. And the people that answered 11 of 19, 58%, all of the above. Yes, allocability and industry practice is one of the main reasons that DCA will cite. So let's go on to the next slide. So in the remaining about 10 minutes before we bring on Darren, I just want to tell you some of the other new things. There is a contractor submission portal for incurred cost audits. There are updates to their cost guidebook, information for contractors, and some of the other items. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, just put out all the bullets. It's basically the contractor submission portal for incurred cost submissions. Your ICE submission, hopefully you're using that if it applies, is basically a SharePoint thing for the ICE submissions. DCAA would love for it to automatically check for adequacy, but that's probably an AI thing and they're not there. And I just say on the side, ever since I worked for DCAA, and I worked for DCAA too many years ago that I'm not even going to tell you, they've always been committed to technology. So if there was a way that they could do it, they would have AI do it. But it wouldn't be surprising in a couple of years that maybe the AI could check the math or do some other things that weren't there before. There we go. We have a few questions. All right. You want to read one or two of them?
Yeah, I can get those. I think the first one, Paul, is does or has GRF done any of the IPA audits for DCAA?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. No, we don't. To do that, we would have to also technically become a government contractor. We don't want to become a government contractor. So unfortunately, we don't do that. And in fact, you don't get the choice of selecting. DCAA would select it for you. Any other questions?
Yeah, the second one is, do you have any guidance on calculating ADV? Like what costs or contracts are included or excluded from the ADV calculation?
It's basically determined whether they are a cost type contract. So you can have cost plus fixed fee, award fee, incentive fee. I think even fixed price redetermination is kind of a weird thing. That the ODC and the G&A on the ODCs, and it could be if you have any grants that are cost reimbursable, you could also have a contract that's cost reimbursable with no fee. All of those would qualify. Then you must subtract out assist audits of cost type or cost reimbursable subcontractors. Any others?
No, I think that should be it for now. So
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul.
Okay. All right, let's go to the next slide. Yep, one back. Oh, is that the next one? Okay, sorry, my apologies. So it's basically a SharePoint kind of thing. They basically want it so that you submit it and it's logged into official system. So if you go to the next one, is a flow chart, hopefully. And so if you remember, the old WAF system was replaced by the PIEE, Procurement Integrated Enterprise Environment. So it'll actually add another role. And so go to the next slide. And so you'll log in and so forth. You'll be putting in your cage code. There'll be a verification process. Then you should be able to upload your submission. And once submitted, it'll go to DCAA SharePoint. And then basically you'll be notified that it's there, as well as the Cognizant DCAA office. So it's kind of cool. Let's go to the next slide, as my piece is running down here for time. And I'd like to talk about, there is a part of their contract audit manual. It used to be Chapter 7. And Chapter 7 would say, okay, how does DCAA interpret depreciation or other leases and other things that sometimes are bonuses, and what do they expect? And they years ago pulled that out of their defense contract audit manual and just called it a guidebook. And so they're working on more updates. If you go to the next slide, you will see the list below of some of the things that they address right now. And it's important, because if you start to get into disagreements and you want to do research in the FAR, we don't agree with them, like bonus is a big deal. Unless you have a very good plan and you support the basis of that thing as well, DCAA will probably question that. And it could be a lot of money. So, but anyway, here's how you'll hear by reading this, how do they think about it? And you got to understand that. And they're going to be adding some new things and updating this. Okay, let's go to the next one. Information for contractors. This is a very good tool. It used to be like a paperback thing that was handed out to people. Go to the next slide. It's on their website, and some of the things they cover is the pre-award surveys of an accounting system and what that involves, price proposals, although they, and when I'm talking about proposal based on a manufacturing model, I'm talking about indirect rates. And even though it's, manufacturing or engineering pool, engineering is similar to service, right? So, and they think they even have a material handling, a little one. So if you never put together a projected indirect rate, go to that thing. You can download it from DCAA.mil under guidance, I believe, information for contractors. And it will give you an example, a model to see how DCAA would like to see it. Well, they're going to update it and come in, bring it probably up to the 21st century, but still a lot of things in here are very, very valuable. The interim and final public vouchers, just if you've never prepared one and wanted to know how to prepare one, they show you what it should look like on the cover, 1034, and the backup 1035. What if you have to have a progress payment for certain types of fixed price contracts? And if you have a progress payment one, if you're in a loss position, you got to do the loss ratio factor. I've never done it, but it's in the book, and it would show you how to do it. And of course, it also discusses incurred cost proposals and what they expect. Let's go to the next slide. Contractor information survey. Okay, this is not an audit. It's just they're gathering information for smaller entities where they don't really audit you. So you're like, gee, I got a contract. How come DCAA isn't knocking on my door? Well, they do get copies, I believe, of your contract. And someone may go out and want you to complete the survey. If you get it, you're not going to be very happy. It's probably 12 or 15 pages, and it's lots of stuff. However, even though it's a pain and a lot to fill out, it will begin to give you insight into DCAA's concerns about a government contractor. I do have a copy. If you want a copy, I can send it to you. That has been sent to us. But if you're super large, you don't need it. But if you want to look at it, we'd be happy to post it with the PowerPoint and other things that will go up on a website. And it's the information for survey, but it is asked a lot of questions. It is a pain to fill out, but it does give you insight into how DCAA thinks. And I think Yev has something special for you.
Yep, our final polling question, and that is, DCAA uses outside auditors to perform proposal reviews. These outside auditors are called IPAs. Very simple. Is that true or is that false? So take a moment to submit your answers. And in the meantime, I will provide the fourth and final CPE word for today's webinar. That word is award. Remember, write this word down. You will need it for the survey that follows our webinar if you would like CPE credit. That final CPE word is award, AWARD.
Well, this, as I look at the question, it's kind of tricky. It wasn't meant to be that way, because you could answer true and say, IPAs are the people, that are doing outside auditors. And then you would say true, but it really was meant to be false, meaning that they only do incur cost audits and they don't do proposal audits. But you could have been focused on, well, what are they called? They're called IPAs. So apologize for that, but really the correct answer is false. Let's go to the final slide before we bring on Mr. Darren, who's the man for security. And that is Business Systems NDAAs. That's a National Defense Appropriation Act. And sometimes DCAA wants to get something in the DFAR, that's the Defense FAR Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. And they're still trying to get something, requirements for the review of a contract business system, which still, I guess, as of this date, haven't been approved, and change from significant deficiency to material weakness. So that's pretty much what that involves. And I think these are probably the most important things from the latest current initiatives. You can look around and they will be presenting from year to year. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Jeff.
Perfect. Thanks, Paul. Well, I will give quite frankly, a pretty quick handoff back to Darren. And as I mentioned before at the beginning of our webinar, Darren will be discussing some solutions for government contractors, specifically as it relates to their cybersecurity requirements. So with that, Darren, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Paul and Yev. Paul, perfect timing. I've never seen someone stop like right on time. That's pretty good. And this is one of the technologies we use for some of our clients. This aspect is really for third-party risk management. So we have on the right-hand side is what's called open source threat intelligence. It's very comparison to, you kind of see movies with hackers. You see that black screen, they're typing away, they're breaking into things. That's more Hollywood. This is what's called, like I said, open source threat intelligence. This is an equivalent to someone driving by your house saying, okay, you have a dog, you have floodlights that pop on when there's motion outside, leave your windows open at night. We're not breaking into your systems. That's something that can be done. This is more of that reconnaissance phase. We're seeing all these different things. We have the digital footprint, which is all the assets that are publicly facing. So if they're behind your firewall, they're not accessible outside the office, for example, not on a VPN, we would be able to see those. Patch management, we can see are using legacy systems, are using like Windows 7 equivalent servers, application security. Do you have the controls built for your applications when people log into a potentially custom system you built? Are there prompts for logins, things of that nature? Credential management, you can find out, are your vendors, are they signing up? Are their employees signing up for kind of random websites? I've seen Stitch Fix before, Scentfly, which is a perfume version of Stitch Fix out there. You can see, can these be used in a password spraying attack? Hacktivist shares, obviously for the government, can be useful to find out, is there leaked information? Do you have government secrets or government CUI? Are people sharing that and saying, hey, I found this at this company and this information's out there now? Some of the other ones, network security and attack surface, really lets you know what open ports or what are entryways into your systems. And then fraudulent domains is a general one. You can see if your vendors or people are popping up fake domains from your vendor and potentially sending you an invoice saying, hey, you have an unpointed invoice. Let's pay that. And like, well, no, that's not our actual vendor. We don't want to pay that person. But we can go to the next one, Nathan. And this is a tool that's built upon that scan. So we've looked at all those items in that scan. There was 20 items. And from there, we can estimate, and based upon their publicly facing assets, policies, everything that we can see from this organization or these organizations, you can see how compliant are they with any framework. For example, I pulled out 800-171, which is what CMMC is actually based off of. And from here, we can see this green ring, this blue ring shows the completeness of the framework and how much of the framework we're able to extract from the external facing assets. So from there, we can say, okay, from a public perspective, they're compliant with CMMC. They may not need to be, but they have the controls in place publicly. They could not have the controls internally. That would be a different type of assessment, finding out, okay, is the internal network, is that secure? So obviously, if you're sharing your data or the government's data that you're using as a subcontractor, you want to make sure that you're not just giving away information to anybody. Like, you obviously have a responsibility protecting that data. If they get breached, it obviously comes back to you saying you gave that data away. So we can go to the next one, Nathan. From here, as I mentioned, we can click through these items. We can say, for example, here we're looking at cryptography. So we looked from their privacy policy on their website, this organization, the technology they're using. So this is using AI to kind of comb through their policies. Obviously, policies can be extremely long and tenuous to kind of read through. We're actually going there and saying, okay, does this even match up? So there's a 55% confidence that is true based upon their stuff, that actually matches what CMMC is requiring. So we can look at that. It makes it a lot easier than going and manually kind of reading through that policy and say, okay, where does this match up? Let me go to the next control and see if that matches up. So it definitely helps with that. The next one is the ransomware susceptibility. So this looks at those 20 categories and says, okay, based upon this, this organization has a higher risk of ransomware. Just because they could be at the lowest risk, they could be all the way to the left in green, they could still be susceptible to ransomware. It really takes that one unfortunate user who clicks something, picks up the phone at MGM and kind of just says, yeah, we'll reset your password, and they unfortunately take over MGM and Caesars. So we can go to the next one. And this one is a fun one from the financial perspective. So this is what's called fair analysis. So everybody wants to know, okay, if we have a breach, what's it going to cost us when it comes down to it? Yes, it's horrible that you get breached or have ransomware, things of that nature. You can say, okay, well, based upon this calculation, you can say, we have an exposure, we have all of this PII or sensitive data or CUI. What is the risk? What's it going to cost us from an insurance perspective? So from this example, we can say it's going to cost roughly $26,000 a year for every incident. So maybe you have cyber insurance that'll cover that. Maybe you don't. That's something that you can look into, but it comes down to how easy is it for a malicious actor to kind of exploit this vulnerability? Is this a widely known old vulnerability? How easy is it for them to find this vulnerability? Maybe a vulnerability scanner wouldn't find this. Do you have a CISO? Do you have employee training, data loss prevention? So different factors or controls that are based on there that would lower or mitigate that. Obviously, if you have more records, more controls or less controls, it would obviously affect these numbers. But this is an example that people really like to understand the dollars behind it. You can go to the next one. So this next one is GRC software we used. The example I showed up here was CMMC level 1. So obviously the DoD has changed it to 3 levels instead of 5 in the past. So from here, we can see, here's the controls. We can say this organization is just about 62% completed. They've done what they need to do. Obviously level 1, it's a self-assessment. You don't need to get audited as of right now. That may be something they do in the future. Obviously level 2, half of level 2s and level 3, obviously you have to be audited. So we can go to the next one. From here, so you can track everything in this software. So if you are currently a level 1 organization that you do the self-assessment yearly, you can go in here and you can actually mark and assign everything out. You can say, I'm assigning Darren to kind of do this, check every month, make Darren a task that says check every month and make sure that everybody's an authorized user in our system. Make sure that Darren didn't forget to remove someone's access when they left the organization. We can kind of create reoccurring tasks to kind of go back and look at that every quarter, like I mentioned. You can put a policy down there. You can say, link it to our information security policy that says Darren or the CISO is going to check this every quarter, maybe every month, depending on what your organization. You can put a budget behind it so you can really understand the dollars behind it of how much time and how much money are we spending to do this task. And it's something that we can automate. It's something that we'd have a third party do for us. So we can go to the next one, Nathan. And this is, like I said, we can attach documents in here. So everything can be in a living document in here. So you can have control activities, different risks associated with that. Is there a risk of, we forgot to lock out Darren's account when he left the organization? It's been there for 6 months. We have to go back and probably audit and see did anything happen with that account? Like I said, vulnerability scanning document in there, just an example, you can put multiple documents in there and kind of link it and say, this is the policy we're following, or this is the vendor we're using to kind of use their technology to scan or do whatever the task is. You know, the next one. Like I said, documents, tasks, there's a vendor risk manager. So you can actually send out questionnaires to your vendors and say, okay, do you have cyber awareness training? Do you have antivirus? What are you doing for all these different controls that we have as an organization? Are you following those controls when we share our data or share our access to our systems? These are different control activities. Every month, Darren runs a vulnerability scan, or every quarter we do this activity. We can track all of our risks to the organization from the cyber IT side. There's a risk of these different vulnerabilities. They're out, they're coming through. Have we checked our systems to make sure we're not vulnerable? Or are we doing the patching, the end of life patching for Microsoft? I know Linux has their own end of life situation. Microsoft is about every 3 to 4 years, something like that, and it goes to extended protection. And go to the next one. I think this is the last slide, but this is basically saying this is an audit module. So you can use that same technology to store all your tasks, all your open issues, and you can say, well, we're moving up. We're starting at CMMC level 1, and now we move to level 2. Now we have to have an audit. All this information is already in this system. So you can say we have open items in here, in progress, completed items. So we check the physical protection. The auditor gets access to this screen. They can say, I'm going to import all my requests. I need all this information. Can you kind of just drop it in here? And it's already there. You don't have to worry about finding it in your SharePoint or wherever, each individual system kind of pulling all this data in from different locations. It's already living in here. You kind of made this your ecosystem for tracking items. Kind of makes it easy. Auditor gets access to this and kind of can generate the report right from here. I think that's it. I guess I'm passing it back to you, Yev.
Excellent. Thanks, Darren. Yeah, I really like how visual all of this is. I would argue, at least for somebody like myself, it just makes it so much more digestible and, more importantly, I think actionable. So I think that was great. Well, with that, we'd like to thank everybody for attending today's discussion and webinar. Thank you to both Darren and Paul, of course. And as always, we encourage you all to follow us on social media at GRF CPAs, and to also visit our website for any upcoming events and alerts. Please remember, again, if you need CPE today to complete the survey, that will appear automatically following our session. Thanks as always, and have a great day.